Welcome to Crosstalk Solutions. My name's Chris, and today we're going to be setting up both a point-to-point and a point-to-multipoint wireless bridge using the NanoBeam 5AC that runs Air OS 8. Now, I haven't done a point-to-point, point-to-multipoint video in a long time, so this is essentially going to be an updated version for 2022. And while this is the device that I'm using, the $99 NanoBeam 5AC, any Air OS 8 wireless bridge product is going to be set up very, very similarly. So it doesn't really matter which wireless bridge product you happen to have, they should all be very similar to the setup that I'm doing here today. So if you enjoy this video, if you got something out of it, make sure you like it and subscribe to Crosstalk Solutions for 2 to 3 brand new videos every single week. If you're interested in any of the equipment that I feature in this video, I'll have links to everything down in the description below. And if you're interested in just buying me a beer, there is a link down below to do that as well. Okay, let's go ahead and hop right into it because I feel like this is going to be a relatively long video. On my screen here, I have the architecture that I'm setting up, and this is sort of part of a larger project that I'm working on. As you can see here, we have some 3 different areas, or 3 different houses, if you will, and between the main house here and the back house, we're doing a point-to-multipoint wireless bridge. Now, as I said, I'm going to set it up as a point-to-point first, just so that you can see that, and then I'm going to change it to a point-to-multipoint, and I will explain everything along the way as I go. So from this main house, we're going to be powering up this NanoBeam 5AC Gen 2, and that is going to be the access point side of the point-to-multipoint wireless bridge, and then I'm going to have 2 separate NanoBeam 5ACs as the station side. So when you set up a point-to-point or point-to-multipoint bridge, the side where the internet is coming from, or the side where the main network is coming from, the master controller, if you will, is considered the access point side of the bridge. So you have an access point and then a station, right? And you can have 1 access point and 1 station for a point-to-point bridge, or you could have 1 access point and multiple stations for a point-to-multipoint bridge. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, also check this out. So this is the NanoBeam 5AC, and this product has gone through a few revisions. Here's the old one. This is the, first it was the NanoBeam, I think it was just the NanoBeam AC originally, something like that. Then they came out with the NanoBeam AC Gen 2, and then they came out with the latest iteration, which is the NanoBeam 5AC. Look at the difference in the packaging, though, between the Gen 2 and the 5AC. These are almost identical products as far as I know. But yeah, they kind of switched up the packaging to this sort of brown box UISP packaging, which I'm sure saves them a few bucks overall. Okay, so let's go ahead and get the first one out of the box now that we know what our architecture is going to look like. And again, I will be explaining all of this as I go. Now, me personally, I'm going to be setting this up using my laptop with an Ethernet connection plugged directly into these devices. However, it is also possible to set these up using the UISP app on your smartphone. Okay, so I'm not going to be doing the smartphone way of doing this, although you can do it. I have done videos on how to do that. It should be relatively the same as those videos. In the box, we have, of course, the NanoBeam. We have a sort of mounting system for this device. We have a hose clamp for pole mounting the NanoBeam. And then we have a 24-volt passive PoE injector. 24-volt passive is not used by a lot of the Unify equipment. So for instance, I'm going to be powering this up with the Unify Lite 8 PoE. Now, this only does 802.3 AF PoE, okay? Not 24-volt passive. So how do you make that transition? You make the transition using this little device here. This is the INS-3AF-I-G, and it's a gigabit adapter that takes 802.3 AF PoE in on one side and outputs 24-volt passive PoE on the other side. So you can use this device to get this thing powered up. You can use the PoE injector that it comes with to get it powered up. Or you can use a device such as the older US8 150 watt switch, which is an older UniFi switch, but it had the ability to do either 802.3 AF PoE or 24 volt passive PoE, and you could select that on a per port basis. So I'm using most of the newer equipment. So for my build, I'm using this US8 Lite switch, but I am also going to have to use the 802.3 AF to 24 volt passive converter in order to power these up. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Let's take a closer look at this device. So really there isn't much to it. There is 2 Ethernet ports inside and a little reset hole for factory resetting the device. One of these Ethernet ports is PoE in plus data in, and the other is PoE out. And the PoE out port, I believe, will only transfer through the 24 volt passive PoE. I'll double check that though and put a note on the screen if I'm wrong about that. It also has this nice little catch here, which some of the older ones did not have, so you can't really lose the cover to the Ethernet ports, which is kind of nice. Okay, so I'm going to take the PoE injector to start. Now, by default, these devices come as IP address 192.168.1.20. So I'm going to connect to, I'm going to manually set my laptop to that IP address, the Ethernet port of my laptop, and we are going to connect to that IP address for the initial configuration. All right, so I have the PoE injector here. I'm going to plug one cable into the PoE side. It's the red PoE side of the PoE injector. And I'm going to plug the other side into the port labeled main or PoE in. And you can see as soon as I plug it in, we get some lights on the side. That's exactly what we want to see. Now I need to also connect my laptop to that same PoE injector. And essentially what I'm doing here is I'm creating a tiny network with 2 devices between my laptop and this device here. Okay, so that is plugged in. And I need to go set my Ethernet adapter. Let me turn off my Wi-Fi. So I'm disabling my Wi-Fi on this laptop. By the way, I'm using this really cool Anchor 655 USB hub that has Ethernet built in, since this laptop only has USB Type-C. I will also put a link to this down in the description below. All right, so on my laptop, I'm opening up my internet or my network settings. I'm going to click on my Ethernet adapter, and I'm going to manually edit the IP address so that it is in the 192.168.1 subnet. Now, I don't need a gateway, I don't need a DNS server or anything like that, because I'm just going IP address to IP address. So 192.168.1.99 is fine. Basically, it can be anything other than .20, which is what this becomes by default. And then you want your subnet mask to be 255.255.255.0. We're going to save that. And I should be able to ping this device at .20. So bringing up a command prompt, I'm going to say ping 192.168.1.20. And there we can see that I'm receiving replies. All right, so next I put 192.168.1.20 in my browser, and we can see that I have been redirected to Chrome's warning page about an invalid SSL certificate. That's because I'm using HTTPS and I am not surfing to a device that has a valid SSL certificate. Totally fine. We're going to say advanced and proceed to. And now we get to the initial setup wizard for Air OS 8. So we're going to say we are in US. Again, use your own information for your own stuff. On this screen, by the way, notice down here, upload backup configuration. So when you finish your setup, take a backup, right? And then if the device ever fails, you can replace it. And at this screen, you just want to re-upload the backup that you took, and it'll use all of those same settings on the device. In our case, though, we're setting it up fresh. We're setting it up brand new. So I'm just going to say continue. And now we want to set a username and a strong password. Okay, once you've picked your username and strong password, just click Save. And we get a screen right off the bat that says right here, Management Radio is enabled and will be active for 11 minutes and 19 seconds. We can dismiss that. Essentially what that means is these devices have a separate Bluetooth management radio that comes on during the initial setup so that you can set up the device with the UISP, or maybe it's called the UNMS app. I don't know, they changed the name in there somewhere. But once you go through the initial setup, that management radio is then disabled so that it's not, using up extra power and broadcasting extra signals that you don't need. Okay, so on the dashboard here, we can see my NanoBeam 5AC Gen 2 here on the left-hand side. And what this is doing is essentially scanning through the 5 gigahertz band, and it's looking for other devices, which right now there aren't any. I haven't set anything up yet. So first thing we want to do is come in here to System, and we can see that our firmware version is 8.7.1. Here's where you can disable the management radio on startup. And I'm going to go ahead and give this a name. We're going to call this Main House AP, since this is going to be the access point side of my point-to-point bridge. Now, you can also enable the PoE pass-through here. Again, the PoE pass-through is good for instance, if you're powering up a separate access point or maybe a surveillance camera that's going to work off of the 24-volt passive PoE pass-through port of the device. I am not doing that in this case, so we are going to move on, and we're going to save these changes. So since this device is going to be on a different subnet, it's actually going to be in 192.168.42.x. In fact, this is going to be 42.10, and then the other two devices are going to be 42.11 and 42.12. Since we are changing the IP address of this device, that's what we want to do next. Because once I change the IP address, I can then plug it into the main network in the 192.168.42 subnet, and it will have internet access, and then I can actually run the software updates that it needs. So we're going to go over here to Network. Network mode is bridge, that's fine. We can leave configuration mode as simple. We want to do a static IP address, and I'm going to give it the IP address of 192.168.42.10. Again, adjust this for your own network settings if you are following along this tutorial. The gateway is going to be 42.1, and then we'll give it a couple of IP addresses for DNS, 1.1.1.1, 9.9.9.9. Now, you can use local IP addresses for this. These are public IP addresses, you know, Cloudflare and Quad 9, but you can use local internal IP addresses for your DNS resolution instead if you want. Doesn't make any difference. And then we're just going to say save changes. Now, when I save changes, of course, the IP address of this device is now going to change to 192.168.42.10. So I need to first change my laptop to match that same subnet. So I'm going to right-click, Network and Internet Settings, click on the Ethernet port, edit the IP address, and we're going to say, instead of 1.99, we're going to say 42.99. And I still don't need a gateway or anything. I'm just going to reconnect to the device and just make sure that it did take on that new IP address. So going back over here, it has tried to redirect me to 42.10, but I hadn't changed my laptop yet, so we're going to refresh that page. It might still be rebooting, so we'll give it just a moment. And there it goes. Came right back, advanced, proceed. And we're going to log in with the username and strong password that we gave the device. Okay, so now we've logged back in. We've verified that the IP address has changed into the subnet that I want it to be. I'm now going to disconnect this device and then plug it into the device that's actually going to be powering it for this setup, which is a UDM SE, which has PoE built into the port. So I'm going to go ahead and disconnect it. And I have this cable here that comes from that UDM SE. I'm going to take this cable here, since it's 802.3 AF, I'm going to plug it into the PoE inside of my INS adapter. And then I'm going to plug this device into the 24-volt passive out side of the adapter. And once again, we have the blue lights that we want to see. The device is now booting up again. And as soon as it boots up, we're going to log back in. Okay, it has booted back up now, and I've taken the Ethernet connector from my laptop and I've plugged it directly into that same network, into the UDM SE that I'm using to power up the NanoBeam 5AC. I'm also going to come over here and I'm going to change my connection back to DHCP for now, just so that I have internet access on my laptop. I technically don't need to do that, but again, this just means that I have full internet here, full internet on the AC, the NanoBeam 5AC. All right, so let's log back in. And at this point, I don't need this management radio anymore, nor do I need it warning me that it's still on for X number of minutes, so I'm just going to say disable forever. All right, clicking on System once again, we have check for updates set to on. I'm going to click check now, and it says that firmware update version 8.7.9 is available, so I'm going to say download. Okay, downloaded. Now we're going to say agree and update. So this is going to update from version 8.7.1 to version 8.7.9. I'm going to let this run, and it should take about 5 minutes or so. Once it's done, we will come back and take it from there to start setting up the actual access point side of our point-to-point wireless bridge. The NanoBeam 5AC has now been updated to version 8.7.9, and I've logged back in. So now we're going to go ahead and set up the access point side of our wireless point-to-point bridge. So here we can see basic settings. Access point is currently off. We're going to say on. And the first thing I'm going to do is set up a point-to-point wireless bridge, right? So in that case, I want to turn on point-to-point mode, and it says only AirMax AC stations are supported. So what this means is that when you are doing point-to-multipoint, you can connect the NanoBeam 5AC in what's called mixed mode point-to-multipoint, so that you can connect to non-AC but still 5 gigahertz devices, like, for instance, the older NanoBeam M5, right? So that's not a NanoBeam AC, it's an M5. It's sort of the older generation. And the mixed mode point-to-multipoint allows you to connect to either AC devices or the older generation devices in a mixed mode. That's why they call it mixed mode. So for this first one though, I'm turning on point-to-point mode. When I add multiple stations, when I add the third device into the mix here, I'm gonna disable this setting so that it is in point-to-multipoint mode. So now we have our channel widths, and again, you can play around with this. Essentially, the channel width means the larger number, so it's 40 by default, 40 megahertz. If you go up to 80 megahertz or up to 80 megahertz, you are using more of the 5 gigahertz spectrum, which means that you can get more bandwidth out of your devices. However, when you expand the amount of the 5 gigahertz band that you're using, you're also more susceptible to interference from other devices. Okay, so if you're putting this out in the middle of nowhere like I am, well, I can use an 80 megahertz channel width because there's nothing else out in the area that's really going to be competing with that. Then we have our frequency list that we can control. So if I say edit, this is the available frequency list. Now, DFS channels, you see a lot of these are marked DFS. Those are essentially channels that are reserved, like emergency and, government radio signals have priority on those channels. So from my understanding of DFS, you can use those channels, but if you're in an area, say near an airport or near some sort of military base or something like that, if those entities are also using those channels, whatever they're putting on the channel has priority over anything that you're doing, okay? So what I typically like to do here is I pare it down and I just get rid of the DFS channel. So we're not even gonna take a chance that anything is going to take priority over our stuff. We're just gonna use sort of the publicly available channels. And you can also do a wireless scan of the area and pare it down even further to only frequencies that don't have a lot of traffic on them. So for instance, if you have some other access points or you're in a sort of congested area, you might want to run a scan, a wireless scan, to see what is using the airspace around you, and then select only the frequencies here that are the least used frequencies. That way you're gonna kind of give yourself the least amount of interference. So I'm gonna say okay, and then we can see the center frequency here is set to auto. So I've basically said, from this list of frequencies that I've selected, automatically use the best channel. But you can also manually select which channel you wanna use out of all of those different channels that I mentioned. Okay, so the SSID, what is the name of this wireless network that we're creating for this point-to-point wireless bridge? Now remember, a point-to-point wireless bridge is a connection between two devices. You can think of it as a wireless wire. There are even devices out there that are called the wireless wire because that's what this is for. This is not for connecting your iPhone or your tablet or your IoT devices to a wireless SSID. This is only for use between these two devices in a point-to-point network or a point-to-point bridge, or the access point and multiple stations in a point-to-multipoint bridge. If you want to have client connectivity to the network, you still need to have separate access points on the back side or the front side of this wireless bridge. Or in other words, your iPhone doesn't connect to this. Your iPhone connects to the access point that is also plugged into this, or into the same network, if you will. So we're going to call this Air Laser. Again, use whatever SSID you want. And then for the output power, for the setup here, I'm just going to bring this down to 0. The range of output power is anywhere from -4 up to 21, and you're going to want to set that output power based on how far apart your devices are. If your devices are not that far apart, like in this case, they're only going to be about 50 yards apart, it doesn't need to have a lot of output power. You don't need these things screaming at each other. You just need enough power so that they can hear each other cleanly. For the setup though, I'm going to set everything at 0 dBm, and I am going to set it to auto adjust the distance. I'll let it figure out the distance on its own. Okay, so scrolling down, there is a pre-shared key. It's this weird 0 thing that they have in here by default. I'm going to generate a strong pre-shared key for these devices. This is just like the wireless password that you use to connect to your wireless network at home, except it's only going to be used between these two devices. It needs to be the same SSID and password on both sides, or in the entire setup if you're using a point-to-multipoint setup. Okay, so I have added in my password. We're going to go ahead and say Save Changes. And as far as the access point side of our point-to-point bridge goes, that's all we need to do. We are good to go to set up our first station antenna. I should also say, when it comes to mounting these devices, it does come with a pole mount. So it comes with sort of a ball mount and joint that goes on the back here, and then there is a space that you can mount this onto a pole. Sometimes you don't have a pole that you're mounting this on. Sometimes you're mounting it on the side of your house or the side of a building. In that case, I like to use these quick mounts. And the way that this works is, you see it has a screw in the back and a metal plate. The screw goes through the metal plate, and you screw the metal plate into the wall. And then you can adjust this arm, and you take the ring that comes with the Nano Station, or the NanoBeam 5AC, and you use the adapter here along with a little washer that they give you. You can't really see that, but it is in there. And you sort of line it up so that the washer and the ball mount that are in here just goes right on the back of your device. And you can tighten it up nicely, and now you have this really nice adjustable quick mount that you can use to get this thing screwed into the wall in, basically any position that you need it to be. So yeah, I really like these quick mounts. Again, links to all of this stuff down in the description below. All right, let's go ahead and pop open our next device. Okay, we will put this down here, and now, again, remember, by default, this is 192.168.1.20, so I kind of need to go through that same sort of setup where I've got the PoE injector. I'm reusing the PoE injector from the first device. I'm going to plug in power here into the red PoE side of the PoE injector. Then I'm going to plug that into the main PoE side of this device. I should get the blue lights, which I do have. Wonderful. And now I need to take my laptop. I have unplugged it from the other network, and I am plugging my laptop into the secondary port of this PoE injector. And I now need to go back through and set up my laptop so that we are back in the 192.168.1 network. So I'm going to say manual instead of DHCP, and then we're going to say 192.168.1.99 with a subnet mask of 255.255.255.0, and we're going to say save. Okay, so I should be able to ping 192.168.1.20. I am able to, good. So we will now log into that IP address. Okay, here we go. And we're going to go through the initial setup wizard one more time. So United States, I agree. Continue. UBNT is the username. And then I'm going to use the same password that I used on the other device. You don't have to do that, but I am going to. This is for administrative access into the device itself. All right, so we log in, we get the note about the management radio. Since I know I'm not going to use the management radio at all, I'm just going to say disable forever right off the bat. And it's scanning frequencies right now. So, but before I do anything, I need to change the IP address of this device. So we had 192.168.42.10 for the access point side. For the station side, the receiving side, we're going to do 192.168.42.11. We're going to come over here to system first. Let's give it a name. We're going to say Backhouse Station 1, and we're going to save that. Then we're going to click on Network, and we're going to say 192.168.42.11, and the gateway IP 192.168.42.1, and then we'll give it 1.1.1.1 and 9.9.9.9. We're going to save those changes, and then we're going to wait for that IP change to take effect. I have to change my laptop back into the 42.x network, and then we can reconnect to the station side access point. Okay, so we're going to change this to now 42.99 and save. And let's try to load 42.11. Here we go. Very good. We're going to log in, UBNT, paste, log in. And now, so the setup of the station side is going to be a little bit different, right? So if we come over here to wireless, access point is off, okay? So what I'm going to try to do here, and actually I'm not sure if this is going to work or not, because sometimes this works in previous versions, sometimes it does not. Remember, the firmware by default is 8.7.1, and I updated the firmware of the access point to 8.7.9. So can those two firmwares communicate with each other? Let's find out. So for SSID, we're going to say select, and I do see Air Laser in here, so let's go ahead and select Air Laser. So I've selected Air Laser, we're going to say select, and now it's going to want our pre-shared key for that wireless connection. So I'm pasting in the SSID password, we're going to say save changes. Okay, changes were successfully applied. Let's go to our dashboard, and we're going to just wait a little bit here to see if it actually connects to the access point that I've already set up. Now, if it does not connect to the access point that I've already set up, then I'm going to have to plug this into the network, get it on. Oh, look, it did connect. I was going to say, I have to plug it into the network and get it updated to the latest firmware first, and then it'll connect, but it actually looks like it did connect just fine. So let me go over here to my Ethernet connection. We're going to say Network and Internet Settings, Ethernet. I'm going to change me back to DHCP, and if everything's working, I've got my computer plugged into the station, which is wirelessly bridge connected to the access point, which is plugged into the network, which has internet access. I should get a DHCP IP address from my router and also get internet access. Let's go ahead and save that. I got DHCP and I have internet. Ping 1.1.1.1. Yes, we do. Okay, so my laptop now has internet. This wireless bridge is set up in point-to-point mode. We're going to refine that in a second, but let's log in, and we can see both sides of this bridge. Now, right now, it says capacity is about, looks like between 250 and 300 megabits per second. Let's go to System. We're going to say Check Now, and it is going to update firmware. So we're going to say Download the firmware. Now, it's getting this firmware across the wireless connection between these two devices. Okay, so it's downloaded. We're going to say agree and update. All right, so I'm going to let the station side update to 8.7.9, and then we're going to come back and do some more fine-tuning of the station side. And let's click on our wireless settings once again. So notice there we are in point-to-point mode. It put that on automatically, but access point is off since this is the receiving side. This is the station side and not the access point side of our point-to-point wireless bridge. Now output power is maxed. We're going to go ahead and bring our output power way down to 0. Again, that is something that I will be fine-tuning when I actually do the installation of these devices in an upcoming video. Stay tuned to the channel for that. Okay, everything else here looks good. Let's go ahead and save these changes. Now, since my laptop is connected through this device, keep in mind that any of these types of changes that I save, it's possible that the station side antenna is going to get rebooted, which means that I would lose internet access as part of that. Now, another thing that I do want to talk about is, let's say I'm managing this remotely, or I'm managing the station side from behind the access point side, like plugged into the network, and then the network plugs into the access point, wireless bridge over to the station side. If I'm managing it that way and I need to run a firmware update, you always want to do a firmware update on the remote side first, and then do it on the access point side. So all of your stations in a point to multipoint, or just the single station in a point to point, should be updated first. The reason being is if there's an incompatibility between the firmwares, by updating the remote side first, you still have access to the access point side to do the update. If you update the access point side first, and there's some sort of compatibility issues between the firmware where they won't connect, well, now this one's just gone to the dark side of the moon, right? You cannot connect to it at all. You can't see the device. You'd have to physically go out to the device and plug into it to get it updated at that point. So by updating the station side first, you're hedging your bets, right? That everything's going to still work fine. Update this one first, and if anything doesn't work after the update of the station, you can then update the access point, and hopefully it'll connect after that. As we saw though in this case, it didn't really matter so much because 8.7.1 was able to connect to 8.7.9 no problem. That used to not be the case. It seems like that's a little bit more feasible these days. Okay, so here's the dashboard of the station. I'm now going to go to the dashboard of the access point. Let me log in here. And from the dashboard of the access point, we can actually start to see some of the data coming in, right? So here's the throughput, etc. If I run a speed test from my laptop here, so I'm running a speed test from my laptop in the background, and of course my laptop is connected to the station, which is pushing through to the access point. We're going to start to see some data come across here. Also keep in mind that I have both of these flat on my desk, right? So they're not pointed at each other like they're supposed to be, but they're close enough that they can connect, but this really isn't the ideal setup for running speed tests and testing things and whatnot. Okay, looks like we can see a speed test going over here. And it looks like we are getting about 83 megabits on the speed test with the devices, flat on my desk, not even pointed at each other. So it's not terrible. Okay, yep, and here we can see the speed test finished, and we got 77 down and 41 up. Now again, once these are actually in place and pointed at each other, I would expect to see speeds closer to around 300 megabits for this particular wireless bridge. If you need speeds faster than that for your point-to-point or point-to-multipoint network, there are other devices that are more powerful than these $99 NanoBeam 5ACs. Okay, so we have our first device up and running and working. Let's now go ahead and add another device in point-to-multipoint mode. And this might be a little bit tricky. Let's go over here to wireless settings on the access point. So I'm working on the access point right now. So there used to be a setting that allowed me to choose point-to-point or point-to-multipoint mode. We're going to play around with this a little bit. I'm actually going to leave point-to-point mode on and then try to add in another access point. I might have to turn that off. So I'm not sure if the point-to-point mode setting now means this can become an access point that clients can connect to, or does it mean in point-to-point mode it's just two devices and you have to disable that to have multiple devices? So we're going to learn a little bit here, right? In older versions of Air OS, you used to select, do you want it in point-to-point mode or point-to-multipoint mode? So I might have to turn that off for this to work, but we will see in just a moment. All right, so let's get a third NanoBeam out of the box. Okay, I have plugged in the 24-volt passive PoE adapter. Let's get a network cable here. We're going to plug into the red PoE side, and then we're going to plug into my brand new point-to-multipoint station. This is station number 2. Okay, so blue lights are on, so we have power. And now I need to plug my laptop into the LAN side of the PoE injector. And remember, by default, IP address 192.168.1.x. So let's go ahead and change our IP address. Ethernet, edit, we're going to set it to manual, IPv4. 192.168.1.99, 255.255.255.0. Go ahead and save that. And I should very soon be able to ping 192.168.1.20. I can, perfect. And let's bring up our next station. There we go, advanced, proceed. I'm gonna brush through this one real quick here. So, United States, agree, continue. UBNT is the username. I will put in my password and save. Disable the management radio. Let's go ahead to network. Actually, let's go to system first. We're going to call this one back house station 2. Save that change. We're going to click on network, and we're going to give it IP address 192.168.42.12. So remember, 42.10, 42.11, 42.12. 42.1 is the gateway, and we're going to give it the same DNS servers that I gave the other two. And save those changes. Now I have to change my laptop into the 42 network. Edit, and we're going to give it 42.99, and we're going to save. Okay, now we're logging into 42.12, station number 2. And let's see, again, we're going to try to figure out what that point-to-point mode does exactly in the latest version of AirOS. Let's go to wireless, and we're going to say select SSID. All right, so I've scanned for the device, and it did find the wireless SSID, but for some reason I can't select it. I wonder if that is because of the point-to-point versus point-to-multipoint mode of the access point device. So let's go ahead and plug my laptop into the network, and then we're going to try to set that device to turn off point-to-point so that it should be point-to-multipoint, and then we will try to scan again. Okay, so I'm plugged into the network. I'm logging into the access point, and we're going to set point-to-point mode to off and save those changes. Okay, configuration successfully applied. Let's go to the dashboard and see if the station number 1 reconnects automatically or not. Okay, so I waited about 5 minutes and station 1 did not automatically reconnect to the access point. So I plugged directly into the PoE injector for station 1, and I unchecked the point-to-point setting, as you can see here. So if we go to wireless, I unchecked point-to-point mode, and then I actually reselected the SSID. Now, I don't know if I had to reselect the SSID. I might have just been being impatient, but it did connect after I did both of those things. As you can see, we are now connected from access point to station 1. However, station 2 has not yet been connected. So let's now plug into station 2. There we go. I have now plugged into the PoE injector for station 2. I'm going to bring up the interface for station 2, and then we're going to say select. And then once it's done scanning, I'm going to select the Air Laser SSID, and now I have the option to select that wireless network. So I need to put in the correct pre-shared key, so we will paste that in there. And I'm going to tune the output power down to 0. Everything else we're going to leave as is. We're going to say save changes. Notice that point-to-point mode is off on this second one. So we've saved those changes, and now at some point soon, hopefully it will connect and I will start receiving replies from the internet. All right, boom, there we go. So now I have received replies from the internet, meaning that the wireless bridge from station 2 over to my access point is now up and running. But remember, we are still running older firmware on this device. So for station 2, I'm now going to go over to System. I'm going to click Check Now on the updates. Tells me that there is a new version available. We're going to say download, agree, and update. All right, so now station 2 is upgrading to 8.7.9. Once that completes, I will come back and we will put the finishing touches on this whole setup. Station 2 has now been updated to AirOS version 8.7.9, and so we now have a fully updated and fully connected point-to-multipoint network. If I wanted to add more stations into the mix, all I have to do is do the same thing. Plug it in, change the IP address, select the correct point-to-multipoint wireless SSID, and I have more stations connected. One last little bit of fine-tuning that I want to do. If we come over here to System, oh, by the way, here's the dashboard of the access point, 42.10. From here, we can see that there are 2 remote stations, and if I click here, we can select statistics for either of the remote stations that are connected, and if you have more remote stations, you can then select between all of the station side antennas that you want to select. The last little bit of cleanup, if I come over to System, I also just want to set the time zone. So in my case, we're Pacific Standard Time, and I'm going to turn on the NTP client, so we'll save those changes. And I'm going to do that across all 3 of these devices. So we're going to go to Station 1, System, Pacific time, and turn on the NTP client. Station 2, system, Pacific time, and turn on the NTP client. Okay, so that's done. Now, remember the beginning of this video when I said you can restore from a backup if you have taken a backup? Let's take a backup now that we have completely configured our devices. We don't want to lose all of the work that we just did. So from the dashboard, we're going to click on System. We're going to scroll all the way to the bottom, and right down here it says Backup Configuration. Simply click that for every single one of your devices, and now you have saved your backups. Name it something so that you know what it is in the future, and save it in a safe location. The last bit of configuration that I need to do for these devices is to connect them to UISP. That is so that I can centrally manage these devices from my UISP portal. That's beyond the scope of this video. I'm not going to show how to do that here. But if you guys are interested in any sort of videos on how to set up and configure UISP, let me know that down in the comments below. Any other questions or comments you have, also let me know down in the comments below. Again, if you're looking for any of the equipment that I have featured in this video, there are links below to everything that I have shown. Okay, that's going to do it for this simple point-to-point and point-to-multipoint setup video. There's a lot more you can do here. So I just showed the very basics of setting up a point-to-multipoint network, but there's a ton of fine-tuning that can be done, especially if you're running a wireless ISP and you're trying to actually really, hone these devices in and get their settings properly dialed in. Okay, if you enjoyed this video, make sure you give me a thumbs up. If you'd like to see more videos like this, please click subscribe. My name is Chris with Crosstalk Solutions, and thank you so much for watching.